Hi everyone, welcome to the first Khushwant Singh Literary Festival which has gone digital. You saw that video which gave you a feel of the Khushwant Singh Lit Fest. But before I carry on, I'd like to give you a little bit of feel of Kasoli and how the Lit Fest began. 9 years ago, when we were holidaying in Kasoli, Kasoli is only about an hour and a half's drive from Chandigarh, 6,000 feet up in the Himalayas. And that's where my father, Khushwant Singh, had his home and where he did much of his writings. Well, about 9 years ago, we were talking about this, and my father was still alive. And there was a very far-sighted brigadier there, Brigadier Anant Narayanan, who's now a general. And he and we got together and he said, why don't you have a lit fest in Kasoli? So that's how the idea began. And we decided to call it the Khushwant Singh Literary Festival, KSLF. And we decided that we would invite speakers, intellectuals, celebrities from all over, and it would embody some of the values and concerns and passions that my father held. And these included the education of the girl child, the concern for the environment, preserving the environment, and it was also dedicated to the Indian soldier. Kasoli, as you know, is a military cantonment. And after Brigadier Anant Narayan, every brigadier has supported us in holding the Lit Fest. And the present brigadier, Praveen Mahajan, Naveen Mahajan, said, why don't you have it again here? But it was not possible, given the pandemic. So the theme of the literary festival is a new life in this current pandemic. And you've got an array of speakers coming. I should also add that one of the great qualities that my father had was that he was a great communicator, and he could converse with the high and the low. As Kipling put it, he could walk with kings, yet had the common touch. Another quality that he had was his sense of humor, which Bachi, I think, might emit from him. So let me now pass you on to Bachi, who will say, I think, something more about my father. I think she knew my father even better than I did, frankly. Over to you, Bachi.
Thank you very much, Rahul and Nilufer, for asking me to introduce this Lit Fest. Because, I have been here from the very seeding, and I have seen this Lit Fest blossom into something that is really special. And I feel, you said it's the first digital space, but I am just imagining the amphitheater of the Himalayas and us sitting there with that billowing curtain and the breeze and the devdars and that whole ambiance that was there of the Lit Fest. Now, you've said that I know your father better than you, but I wouldn't presume to know Khushwant Singh better than his son. But I can say with a degree of certainty that certainly Khushwant Singh was responsible for my professional upbringing. Because I joined the weekly as a trainee way back in 1969, just when he shuffled into the Illustrated Weekly of India office as the editor. And over the next 8 years, I can say with complete truth, not because it is this Lit Fest, I've said it on many occasions, that I learned everything I know about journalism at the Illustrated Weekly. I will not say at the feet of Khushwant Singh, because that is not the kind of equation that he wanted with anyone. In fact, he would always say when we used to write our blurbs that if you don't say Khushwant Singh on Indira Gandhi, please do not say that. Say Khushwant Singh with Indira Gandhi. Now, the thing is that I also hope that I've absorbed the one mantra which he taught us by example. He never dinned it into us, but it was something that was on view every single day. And that was that take your work very seriously, don't take yourself too seriously. And I think that was really the measure of the man. So Khushwant Singh was really the iconoclast nonpareil, but he had very little to do with the first letter of that word, which is I. He had absolutely no ego. He wouldn't mind if we as a trainee would, cut his copy, or he would tell us to go and cut his copy. This was at a time when editors would probably murder you if you dare even suggest that, you could change a word of his. And I think, and the beauty of it was that he was all this, despite being the world authority on Sikhism, despite being, this best-selling novelist at a time when Indian writers in English were not the prolific breed that they are today. And more than that he had created this absolutely cutting-edge illustrated weekly. And he spoke so strongly and so succinctly, as Rahul said, about so many things that the minute he walked up, to the dais, you could feel this frisson through the audience, because people who had been sitting, getting bored and listless, would all be sitting up to see what Khushwant Singh had to say. And I think, therefore, that I think today more than ever, we need this courageous voice of his. I mean, I cannot tell you how much I miss his voice, because there is such a diminishing breed of people who are willing to call truth to power. He was the promoter of this whole Ganga Jamna Tehzeeb, which is India. Today we are reducing it to a little narrow nalla, and I think he would have stood up and really spoken up against this. So I think that, the theme of this LitFest, a new life, is something that he would have worked for in many more ways than maybe even you will be able to cover at the LitFest. So another mark of the man was his generosity of spirit. And I can say this with complete truth. And who better then to start this LitFest with somebody and to talk on the art and the science of giving than Sudha Murthy? Because she has perfected it to an art, and she has brought it to the science, her scientific temper, because she is, after all, a trained engineer. And she has brought the scientific temper to institutionalize the art of giving. Now, Sudha has given deep and wide. Through her Emphasis Foundation, she has not overseen, but certainly helped to rebuild lives which had been shattered in 16 national disasters that we've had in the last 24 years. Correct me if I'm wrong, so there may be more. And this is what she did. But I think more than this material rebuilding, I think she has rebuilt humanity. She has rebuilt humanity through her books. This corpus of books that she writes with such proficiency and such prolific, even better than you, even more prolific than you, Chetan, if I may say so, and that's really saying for something. And, and through that, she has taught us how to be better human beings. And she has, when I say us, I'm talking of the world, because these books have been translated into all the major languages of the world. In conversation with her is Chetan, who started off as a brat, but has now, I think, matured quite a bit. He's one of those bankers who turned into novelists. He's written 11 blockbuster books, 8 of which are novels, and 5 of which have been turned into movies. You must have seen all of them. But personally, I think I'm a bigger fan of his columns, because there he writes with such, he really then, really reminds me of Khushwant Singh, because he writes with, with clarity, he writes to the point, and he writes incisively. So now, Chetan, over to you and Sudha.